A Chaos Emerald? You've gotta be kidding me, guys. This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
I've always had an appreciation for bizarre, rough, unpolished, or just flat-out messy video games. My all-time favorite game is the original Xbox 360 release of Deadly Premonition, and the 5th and 6th console generations still remain my favorite, for all the really interesting experimentation in game design that was going on. This was a time period of trial and error for almost the entire industry. Games were just trying things for the sake of trying them. And this has given me a deep appreciation for games that punch way above their weight class, whether they succeed or not. And the game I think of first when I think of a title that tried way too much, falls flat on its face, but still remains very entertaining through all of its insanity, is Shadow the Hedgehog. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 on the Dreamcast had introduced Sonic to the world of 3D platformers, and for the most part, they did a pretty damn solid job at it. Playing Sonic stages in Adventure 1 or Sonic and Shadow stages in Adventure 2 is still a blast, and something that I come back to pretty often. Sonic Team had always had a knack for messing around with new ideas and gameplay concepts, and Sonic's move to 3D paid off due to this approach of constantly trying to one-up themselves. I will always stand firm in my belief that the Sonic Adventure games are good, though you're not going to catch me defending the actual low points of those games. But in 2004, Sonic Team USA, having just gotten off the development of Sonic Heroes, were rebranded as Sega Studios USA. The Japanese-staffed, San Francisco-based team, led by Sonic series staple Takashi Iizuka, would develop only 2 games under this name before being merged back into Sonic Team in 2008. Those games were Nights, Journey of Dreams, and the focus of this video, Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow is what happens when a game studio collectively loses its mind. Right from the start of this game's conception, it was going to turn out pretty buck wild, as it basically spawned from an Iizuka fever dream inspired by Underworld and Constantine. And to get a few things out of the way first, is Shadow a good game? Yeah, not really, but it's certainly an entertaining one. Does it make some egregious retcons to Sonic Adventure 2's story? Yeah, of course it does. Is the entire concept of the game from the word go completely screwed? Definitely. This is a game where a Sonic character uses guns. But every single review and discussion of this game seems to circle around those 3 points. But I'm not here to repeat what's already been said. I want to talk about how utterly absurd and frankly overwhelming this game is, and why that makes me love it despite it being far from one of the best gameplay experiences. I don't believe in guilty pleasures personally, and this game is one of the first examples of why I feel that way. I have zero guilt in loving Shadow the Hedgehog. I very much acknowledge the fact that the game is schlocky, full of bloated levels that outstay their welcome, has some pretty clunky movement, and is generally considered the start of Sonic's so-called Dark Ages. Which is a statement I don't personally believe in, because, well, let's rewind to the game that came out right before this, Sonic Heroes. When developing Sonic Heroes, Iizuka and his team set out to surpass the levels and variety they had built in the adventure games, and create 4 teams each with slightly different playstyles. The issue that Sonic Heroes falls into is that all of its levels feel long and bloated, stages just stop being engaging after a while, and in general there's just less incentive to replay levels as there was in Adventure. Heroes, in my opinion, is one of the most boring Sonic games, as aside from a handful of pretty hilarious cutscenes, the game feels so dry, padded, and empty, and the team mechanic of the game feels wildly underdeveloped. Iizuka also fell into an extremely unhealthy habit of trying to beef up levels as much as possible, and since you have to play all the levels in Heroes 4 times to get the game's true ending, Iizuka and co-level designer Etaro Toyota crunched beyond belief, losing a full 22 pounds during this crunch time. Crunch like this definitely isn't Iizuka's fault. It was a failure of Sega's upper management, and this failure of management led to Sonic Heroes feeling all over the place. It was a game that tried to be content-rich without actually having much content in it. The game ends up really dragging its feet. Despite this rough development cycle, this method paid off as Heroes would sell nearly 4 million copies. And because of the success, the mindset that each Sonic game had to be wildly different from the last and absurdly ambitious in scope became common for Sonic Team. And the first result of this new direction was a shift to an attempt to pull in an all-new audience for the series. This is where Shadow's development would begin, and throw the series further down this large-scale, experimental path. Shadow is a game that takes almost every problem that Heroes had, minus the crunch, and doubles down on it. So why do I find it way more enjoyable than Heroes? Well, for starters, this game is completely unhinged. Right from the offset, Sega Studios USA came to a natural conclusion after finishing Heroes. Have a side game starring Shadow, since he was the second most popular character at the time. Give him some guns, why not? Couple vehicles? Branching story paths, those are popular, right? Hero and villain morality mechanic? Throw it in. Let's also throw in 22 levels of varying lengths. Get Blur Studios to make some amazing pre-rendered cutscenes. And let's also make 10 possible endings based on which route you take. Oh, and add a true ending that you get once you beat the other 10. Do you see where they already went overboard with this checklist? Shadow the Hedgehog is a perfect example of a game that tries to do everything under the sun, only succeeds in some areas, but ends up being one of the most entertaining yet frustrating games I can think of. Every single stage in Shadow the Hedgehog has its own quirk and unique tomfoolery to it. And this all stems from the game's absurd story. See, it starts with Shadow still dealing with his existential crisis that started in Heroes. Is he some clone or android, or is he the real Shadow that died at the end of Adventure 2? Before my man can find a good therapist and air his problems out, aliens invade. Okay. These aliens, the Black Arms, would end up being key to Shadow learning the truth of his past. At least that's what the game wants you to think, because depending on what route of 6 stages you take, of which there are 320 possible combinations, the cutscenes that play are held together by staples, not even tape. Shadow's story ends up making zero sense for as hard as the game tries to make every cutscene flow naturally. Plot threads are introduced and dropped willy-nilly depending on what route you take, and it makes the game feel like everything is happening for no rhyme or reason. And half the time, the stages themselves will just be way too overwhelming to even process. This starts right as the game begins in the first stage, Westopolis, which you have to play a minimum of 10 times if you want to get the true ending. This place is a war zone with the alien Black Arms fighting the human Gun, and Sonic and the game's antagonist, Black Doom, constantly screaming in your ear reminding you of the hero or villain objectives, which is either collect X amount of a certain item, or kill all of the enemies from an opposing faction, which half of the time is fine, and the other half extremely frustrating, because sometimes enemies will just hide out being the last man standing, sitting in a damn corner, setting you on a back and forth wild goose chase through the stage, which can be done by warping between checkpoints. Or you can just ignore both and go the neutral route, which most of the time just entails getting to the Chaos Emerald or Ring at the end of a stage. And these 3 approaches existing to every stage makes them quite a lot to deal with at once. And with stages being packed to the brim with so many gun soldiers and aliens, I sometimes forget I'm playing a Sonic game and think I'm playing a Muso instead. There is so much happening at all times in this game. You can turn a corner and see the goofiest slap fight you've ever seen in your life. Then a minute later you'll be playing Panzer Dragoon, Shadow Edition. Sometimes enemies will just decide to spawn right in front of you, cause why not I guess. There's vehicles too, in case you get bored of running, like this borderline untextured Tesla Cybertruck looking mess. And mechs, because mechs are always welcome, even if these ones are real sluggish. The weapons in the game also match the sensory overload, from stop signs, to a katana, to any number of guns. Bro, Shadow, why are you trying to cock an assault rifle? That's not how they work. A tank cannon? Just the cannon, not the tank itself, and even an Omochao gun that's busted as hell. This is easily my favorite weapon in the game. There's a huge variety of weaponry in this game, and since none of them are rigged to Shadow's model, there's a lot of very funny clipping going on at all times. It honestly just adds to how insane the weapon variety is. There's a Billy Hatcher chicken gun in this game that lets you suck up enemies like a vacuum. On top of all these weapons, there's also the morality system, which either rewards you with a Chaos Blast for being a villain, or Chaos Control for being a hero. These bars are filled by killing enemies on the opposite faction of what each bar represents. Chaos Blast is what happens when Shadow gets real problematic, and Chaos Control, it's a fast forward button, or a time stop during boss fights. Shadow's movement in this game is pretty loose and free. You can hit top speed pretty quickly, but that top speed has been significantly toned down from the adventure games. Here it's closer to the speed in Heroes, though I find the overall movement in Shadow to be a bit better than I do in Heroes. Well, most of the time at least. Another improvement Shadow made over Heroes was in the homing attack. Heroes had an awkward hold input for chaining homing attacks, and Shadow thankfully brings back the single tap from Adventure 1 and 2. The downside is that Shadow's homing attack is slow. My dude circles around enemies for hours at a time and feels like he's moving through molasses. This is especially apparent during the game's boss fights, which can range from pretty fun and quick, to, Shadow, please, for God's sake, just do the homing attack, please. The speed of the homing attack had gotten nerfed incredibly hard over the last 4 games, and it's at its slowest here. Another awkward part of the controls in this game is the spin dash requiring you to come to a dead stop to use it. I basically forgot I even had a spin dash in this game, since the few doors that you actually need to slide under this game in, you can just, well, slide under. You can tell the combat in Shadow was mostly built around the weapons, most of which are based on a soft lock auto track to hit enemies, aside from rockets, which you have to aim yourself. This is either extremely easy or the hardest part of the game depending on what angle Shadow is standing at and where the game's pretty messy camera is located. Shadow's camera just goes where it wants half the time during any segment that's not a basic run down a path. The game gives you a bit of control over it, but it'll often just auto-readjust to wherever it feels is comfortable. Peep the disastrous fixed camera angles in this segment. Shadow is definitely at its most fun when the tomfoolery peaks and anything and everything is happening at once. When stages feel more like a Doom WAD than they do a Sonic level, that's when the game really shines. One of the stages I think about the most in this game is Airfleet, where the villain objective is to assassinate the President of the United States. Why do literally no other reviews of this game mention that there is a level where this happens? This is the first thing I think of when I look back at Shadow's wild-ass tone. You assassinate the president in the evil route by blowing up his escape plane, but he's still alive in the next cutscene regardless of what you do, because, you know, E10+. Both of the stages set during the flashbacks on the Ark are basically mazes that you have to haul your ass around and try to find every special enemy to kill. Or just book it to the exit as fast as you can. These arc stages definitely show off the game at its most annoying, as any hero or dark objective requires some really obnoxious backtracking through different routes in the arc. When I was a literal child playing this game, I got lost in these stages specifically. As people who have played this game probably already know, there's also no cohesion between any of these levels. You get a few cities, you get a pumpkin place, military bases, more outposts, alien ship, funny forest, a Young Thug album, and Tron for people with a crippling ketamine addiction. Stages just exist for the sake of existing in this game, and most of the stages are pretty linear overall, not offering the same amount of routes to take as other Sonic games do. The game's sound design is hilarious all around, from every single menu noise being a gunshot, to the gun soldiers just screaming random lines over each other at all times.
This is for my friends!
And Shadow's air dash sounds pretty familiar. Shadow also marked the first time the 4Kids cast from the Sonic X dub would voice the characters in the game, and they all do a fine job. Mike Pollock's Eggman is pretty iconic at this point, and I've never had any problems with Jason Griffith's Shadow, though some voices are just too much to deal with, like Dan Green as Knuckles, which will forever be distracting as hell.
Help! We're being sucked in!
And Sean Schemmel as Black Doom is without question the funniest performance in the game.
Look.
That's the...
Yes, that's right. The space colony Ark. 50 years ago.
This is what Goku Black's voice should have been in the Dragon Ball Super dub. Dr. Claw sounding ass Goku is such a funny voice to me. All the line delivery in this game just has an innate comedic value. Everyone sounds like they're taking the piss every line, and it adds to the almost unintentional comedic tone of the whole thing. The Gun Commander played by Mark Thompson is definitely the most hilarious when it comes to his delivery though.
I don't care! We have no other option! We must protect the President and the Chaos Emeralds at all costs!
Yes, sir!
Every single gun soldier in the game is voiced by Andrew Rannells, and it's almost mind-numbing to hear him talk over himself all the time.
Nobody gets away from Gun! There he is!
The soundtrack for the game is also fine. Jun Sonoe has never been a bad composer, but this game has some of his more lacking tracks. Nothing here hits quite as hard as Pyramid Cave. Though all the vocal themes in the credits from guest artists like Powerman 5000 go crazy. Half the excitement of getting an ending in this game is hearing whatever credit song will play. The real standout though has to be the final endings theme, Crush 40's Never Turn Back, which stands pretty tall as my favorite vocal track from the Sonic series. One aspect of the game that's definitely all around good is its use of squash and stretch animation, giving everything a nice cartoonish bounce, as long as there's no clipping going on, which is pretty often if Shadow's holding a weapon. But the real reason I love this game is Shadow himself. I genuinely think Shadow is a great character, and I can really get what Iizuka was trying to accomplish with him in this game, giving him an arc of self-acceptance and understanding, bringing him to realize that regardless of who he is, he's Shadow, the genuine article, clone or otherwise. Regardless of where Shadow ends up, he'll always have a sense of agency. As the theme song says, he is all of him. And Shadow here does happen to utter some of the funniest dialogue in the history of video games here. I think of some of these lines on the daily. The man is a goldmine.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
And the unintentional comedy that comes from Shadow and every other facet of the game is what makes it a game I genuinely enjoy playing. Of course, in larger chunks it can be very obnoxious, that was the same issue with Heroes. But in short bursts, Shadow the Hedgehog is pure comedy gold, and is genuinely a fun experience. From its off-the-wall levels, to its insane weapon variety, to its hilarious dialogue, nothing about this game is really cringeworthy in my opinion, it's all just funny. We are long past the age of being embarrassed about liking mediocre or strange video games. We just gotta accept it. Never turn back. All hail Shadow. Whatever all the credits say, you know how it is. That's how you should treat video games. Criticism is important and it's worth having deeper discussions about game design, but sometimes a junk food game has just as much value as a classic. Bizarre or rough titles like Shadow the Hedgehog are games I value a lot. Video games would be far less interesting in general if we didn't have titles like this pop up every now and then. Because without the bizarre, tacky, or experimental, video games wouldn't be all of them. Hey, send money to my PayPal so I can get that Shadow Ice once it drops, thank you.